Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another riveting episode of the Development and Analysis of Human Movement. I am your host, Dr. Brandon Gonzalez, and today we are going over the elbow. So, let's get started. Today we're going to have an overview of the general anatomy of the elbow. We're going to have an overview of the alignment of the elbow and the ligaments that help keep it in alignment. And we're going to develop a foundational knowledge of the techniques that identify abnormal alignment of the elbow or abnormal function of the elbow. So as we start, there are three bones within the elbow, the ulna, the humerus, and the radius. There's three ligaments, the MCL, the LCL, and the annular ligament. So the MCL, the medial collateral ligament, is actually the ulnar collateral ligament. So that's a ligament between the ulna and the humerus. Okay, that's on the inside of your elbow. Then you have the lateral collateral ligament, and that's the radial collateral ligament. So that is between the radius and the ulna. And then we have the annular ligament. Yes, baby. Alrighty. I have to go do story time. I'll be back shortly. And I am back from story time. Just a quick excerpt, in case you were wondering. There is a wonderful story here in Click Clack Boo about a farmer and his wild duck who tricks him to go to Halloween because he just doesn't like it. You know, it's riveting. If you got a 3-year-old, it works. Another classic, Brown Bear, what do you see? Hey, kids love it. Little sliders, it's wonderful. And lastly, the newest hit, all the rage. It's like Harry Potter for little kids. Pete the cat. This one goes to the library. Kid loves the library. Anyways, just thought I'd let you know since I went on a story break what we're reading today. So, back at it. I don't really remember what I was saying, so I'm going to start from the top. Three bones, the humerus, the ulna, and the radius are in the elbow. There's three ligaments, the MCL, the ulnar collateral ligament, that's on the medial aspect of the elbow. Okay, that's typically what gets torn when you hear about pitchers tearing their getting Tommy John surgery. They have torn their UCL and they need to repair that. So that's the ulnar collateral ligament connecting the ulna and the humerus. The LCL, the radial collateral ligament, connects the radius and the humerus together, and then we have the annular ligament that wraps around the ulna and radius down here. There's three joints, the ulnohumeral, the radiohumeral, and the radial ulnar. So if you look here, we have the ulnohumeral, that's right here. Most of this joint is actually in the posterior aspect. We have the radiohumeral, where the radius with the capitulum along the humerus here. And then the radial ulnar, so you have a little bit of a piece here, and you also have some down at the bottom aspect, the distal end. And then we also have one capsule where it wraps around in ligaments. So, if we look here, we have the humerus. So the parts of the humerus that we are interested in when we're looking at the elbow are the trochlea, which is the medial distal end of the humerus that articulates as a convex surface with the ulna. The capitulum is the lateral distal end of the humerus that articulates with the convex surface of the radius. The medial epicondyle, the lateral epicondyle, and the olecranon fossa. The olecranon fossa is the posterior distal end of the humerus that serves as the articulation with the olecranon of the ulna. Then the medial and lateral epicondyles are the bony protuberances. So I realized that I did not put the right picture in. So what we're going to do is bring this bad boy over here. There we go. And so now we can take a look at it here. Okay. So this is our elbow right here. This is all our nerves and our veins and everything on there. I did the full anatomy today just because I felt a little crazy. So let's change it up, you know? I'm sure y'all are a little bored of doing stuff like this. Not stuff like this, but just the usual pictures. So I said, let's do something new. So you can see the capitulum right here on the radius, the radial head here, right? And how it articulates with the capitulum on the humerus. This is our lateral condyle of our humerus here, this outside portion. We have the medial epicondyle here. You see the protuberance, went too much, right here, and you see all these flexor tendons here that run down here. I'm gonna take them away for right now so we can take a look at this. Then on the back end we have this is a bursa sac right here. Okay, what this does is if you ever bumped your elbow real hard against something, a lot of times what'll happen is you'll get like what they call like a little frog or a little swelling, it looks like, but it's really not swelling. It's actually this bursa right here that fills up, and bursas just kind of sit over bony aspects of our body to add as a little bit more protection for that. So here is a radiocollateral ligament right here. This is the ulnar collateral ligament right here. Okay, and I think I accidentally deleted the annular ligament. These are just some minor ligaments right here. And it's really just ancillary ligaments, but it's really the same ligament. So, because you have the anterior, posterior, transverse, but we just call them all the same. It's just a general ulnar collateral ligament, UCL. And as we'll go over later, you'll see there's different things in there. So another bursa here. You see there's a little bursa around the head of this radius here as well. And this is the trochlea here, and then the trochlear groove in the ulna, and how it rides in there. And what happens is these two bones actually hit each other when you go into extension, and that's what stops it. That's why you get that hard end feel. So then as we look at the ulna, we have the olecranon process over here on the posterior aspect. We have the trochlear notch, which is what the trochlear groove rides in, or the trochlea rides in. We have the radial notch, that's the articulation between the radius and the ulna. The coronoid process, right there. The ulnar tuberosity right there. All these tuberosities, remember, just serve as muscle attachments, or areas for muscular attachments. Then at the bottom, the distal end, we have the styloid process. So that's the ulna. And if we look at it here in our photo here, that's our ulna here. Same idea. You can see here how it gets really covered in a lot of soft tissue here. Don't want to take off the wrong thing here. And so you can see that right there. There's our radius and our ulna. So this is our radius, the ulna, the ulnar groove on the back. Sorry, wrong button. Okay, you can follow that down. So the ulna there, all the way down to the end of the hand, down here. Okay. You see this interosseous space here that we're going to talk about. Then the radius. Okay, let me slide it down. Down here, radius, ulna. And you can see that while the ulna is larger up top, down at the bottom the radius is actually smaller, or larger, sorry. The radius is actually larger at the distal end. So something kind of fun. You can see it all as we really start diving into the ligaments. You'll see all these ligaments down here in the wrist, which make it kind of fun. Okay. The radius. The radius comprises the main parts of the radius are the head of the radius. That's the part that articulates with the humerus. We have the radial tuberosity, which is the medial superior border protrusion that serves as insertion of the biceps. So you see that there, the radial tuberosity. And then we have the styloid process down at the bottom. This is a distio posterior lateral aspect of the radius that serves as attachment for the brachioradialis. So let's take a look at those here in real time. Okay. Do this. Let's hide this ligament. You can kind of see that tuberosity right in here a little bit. It's hidden. You can see it better on the posterior aspect down in here. And then down at the bottom, you can see, I'm zooming in, I don't want to zoom in, the styloid process right down here. Okay? Right in there. Styloid process. Right there. Okay? So then the joints. We have the radial-ulnar joint, which is the ulna and the radius, and this joint is mostly responsible for pronation and supination. It really is a big part of the elbow and the wrist, right? You have two articulations between the radius and the ulna. It happens at the superior and distal aspect. The radial head turns clockwise and counterclockwise. In pronation, the radius crosses the ulna, and then 80% of the compressive forces are applied to the radius, and then the interosseous membrane transfers the force to the ulna. So what are we saying there, right? Okay, so what we're saying is this. If we look down here, if we fall down here, what's going to happen, right? We are going, the biggest bone that we have down here is our radius, right? Look how big that radius is. Now, the radius is on the thumb side, right? So I always think of it like this, like that's rad, right? Like very California. That's rad, man. And that's my radius right there, okay? And if you look at the bottom when we fall, if we were to fall on an outstretched hand, that radius is going to absorb most of that force because it's the largest bone that is available to us there, right? So what happens is this moves up, and the force is going to move up, and then you have this giant interosseous membrane here, okay? And this helps transfer that force to the ulna, because as it gets taller, the radius gets smaller, and thus we need to transfer that force over to the larger ulna so it can help pick up some of that slack, okay? So then we have the radial ulnar joint right here, right? Radius and ulna, they articulate right here, and they also articulate in the wrist down here. Let's hide these extensors here. Right here. If I hide this ligament, you can see there's kind of an articulation. You can't see the articulations great in this model, but you can at least see them, so that kind of helps. And that's right there, you see that, and you see this white hyaline cartilage making it nice and smooth, glass-like. Really make that as effortless of a joint as possible there. Okay. There we go. Alrighty. Then we have the ulnohumeral, and this is the ulna and the humerus. Its main purpose is for flexion and extension, and the olecranon terminates in extension. Okay, so hyperextension of the elbow due to large olecranon fossa or small olecranon process is if you get hyperextension. So when you have hyperextension, it's because of one of these two things. You have either a larger olecranon fossa that allows it to go a little deeper, or you have a small olecranon process that doesn't actually articulate very well within there to create that. that motion, okay? Ulnohumeral, so we are looking at right up here. So what happens, I forgot to mention before, in that radio-ulnar ligament, or radio-ulnar joint, when you pronate and supinate, so when you do this, what stops it is this radius actually crosses over the ulna, right? So as I move this thumb in this way, it's going to drag as I bring the thumb medial into pronation. What happens is the distal end of the radius crosses over the ulna, and then as I go into supination, so palm open, it goes the other way, okay? And then our humeral ulnar is right here. We've looked at that already a bunch. That's right here. You see that white hyaline cartilage underneath there. So either this little trochlear in here or this olecranon is smaller, right? So either you have a bigger groove or a smaller olecranon if you get hyperextension of the elbow. Radiohumeral, this is the radius in the humerus. It contributes to flexion and extension. This is with the capitulum. It's a convex concave on the humerus, and it acts as a buttress for compression and rotation in fast arm motions. So a lot of times, especially as we just discussed again about the radio-ulnar ligament, what you'll get is right here, right, the capitulum on the radial head. And what you'll get is as this thing rolls over, sometimes you get a little bit of motion, especially on this lateral ligament here. And this can kind of get off on its articulation, causing some of that elbow pain, especially if you have lateral elbow pain with a very fast motion. A swimmer, sometimes tennis players, get that pain on the outside of their elbow because of those violent motions that they're creating, causing a joint incongruency here at this radiohumeral joint. So the medial collateral ligament, okay, it is, let's look here. All right, so our medial collateral ligament is a triangular shaped, and it runs from the medial epicondyle of the humerus to the coronoid process of the olecranon process. It provides stability to the valgus force of the elbow, so any lateral force pushing on the outside here, coming in, okay. It's taut in flexion with the posterior band, and then also in extension, the anterior band. We looked at those earlier, we'll look again. And the flexor muscles aid and support. So what we're looking at with the MCL is right in here. Okay, so you see this is actually the joint capsule in here. Oh wait, lose it here. Trying to move in just enough. Okay, so posterior band right here, anterior band, okay, the transverse, oh that's the capsule, the transverse band here, okay, and this is that triangle, so now you can see that triangle, right? So you see the bottom, the anterior, posterior, the triangle of that MCL, right? The medial collateral ligament, or that UCL, ulnar collateral ligament, same thing. Medial collateral ligament and ulnar collateral ligament, same. Then we have the lateral collateral ligament. This is a triangle shaped band running from the lateral epicondyle of the humerus to the annular ligament and lateral ulna. It provides stability against valgus force of the elbow. It's taut in flexion, and the anconeus helps aid this in support. Okay, let's look at that from the outer area here. We want to rotate. Let's see how this goes. Okay, so here's our triangular band here, right? Posterior, right there. And then the bottom, the annular ligament of the radius. So it kind of turns into that capsule, that bottom posterior part. Not posterior, but the bottom part of that LCL. Okay. Here's a good shot at that annular ligament that we're going to talk about next. Wraps around the radius into the ulna. So it attaches medially on that ulna, wraps around the radial head, and attaches again medially right inside there. And it just kind of holds that guy in there. So you can see how you could injure that and lose a lot of that lateral stability on that radial head with that capitulum as well. Okay. Then there's the joint capsule, which is around the humerus, and it encompasses trochlea, the capitulum, along with the olecranon fossa superiorly and posteriorly. On the ulna, it encapsulates proximal ulna underneath the radial notch, coronoid process, trochlear notch on the radius. It surrounds the head, and 3 previous ligaments support this capsule as well. So the MCL, the LCL, and the annular ligament all support this. So I kind of flew through that just because we can see it here. I think it's a little bit better. Right, so let's take a look here. Here's our capsule, right? Look at that. So this is what it means by that. It encapsulates the front. It's all soft tissue, fibrous tissue, right? You can see how I'm really zoomed in. That's what you can see. Right? You can see here at the LCL, the lateral collateral ligament, or the radial collateral ligament, helps support this capsule laterally. The annular ligament supports it inferiorly. And then lastly, that MCL helps support that. I don't even know where I am right now. Somewhere in the body. We've lost it. There we go. Okay. And you see medially that medial collateral or ulnar collateral ligament really helps this more than anything really support that capsule. You see how it almost cradles the capsule on the medial aspect there. General rules of the elbow is muscles that cross the anterior surface of the elbow bring anterior surface of the arm and forearm together in what we call flexion in the sagittal plane. Muscles that cross the posterior surface of the elbow bring the posterior surface of the arm and forearm together, so this brings us into extension or the sagittal plane. And muscles that originate medially that move laterally towards the radius will pronate, right? So bring it down this way. They'll do this, pronate. And muscles that originate laterally and move medially will supinate. So here. Okay. So what are those muscles? The brachioradialis. Brachioradialis originates at the distal anterior humerus and the coronoid process of the ulnar tuberosity. It does elbow flexion. It lies underneath the biceps, and this is really the workhorse of the elbow. So this is, remember how we said at the beginning, the shorter the muscle, the more powerful it is. You see how this one's shorter and then the biceps actually runs up superiorly. So this helps kind of work that. And this really gets the elbow flexion really started in that motion. Okay. The biceps brachii, the big dog, sun's out, guns out, right? So if we're looking at it, it originates, the long head of it originates at the supraglenoid tubercle, and the short head originates at the coronoid process. They insert at the radial tuberosity, and the action is elbow flexion and supination. The biceps has 2 heads that attach to the scapula, just different areas. And both heads assist with shoulder flexion due to the crossing of the shoulder joint, but the main function of the biceps is at the elbow. So you see how most of that force is actually going to go down towards the elbow because of the fact that the superior aspect that crosses the shoulder is mostly just tendon. So there's no actual contractile force there. So it helps with it, but it's not the main function. There's this corkscrew mechanism. In supination, the biceps crosses the elbow anteriorly, attaching to the medial radial tuberosity. And in pronation, the bottom left picture over there, right over here, the radius rotates medially, wrapping the biceps around the radial head. So you can see how it kind of would wrap around that. And then in pronation, the biceps contracts and unwinds from around the radial head, and it's most effective at 90 degrees of elbow flexion. So if you think of how you would do a bicep curl, it's the most powerful way with that kind of pronated, supinated, and 90 degrees. So like when you want to be the strongest, you actually put your hands in neutral right here and you hold that, because you're working that brachioradialis and that biceps the best. It loses its effectiveness as the elbow extends. So just think of doing a bicep curl and how that muscle is weaker as you get to the bottom. And that's one of the biggest ways people cheat in that exercise, is through shorting the motion and not actually going all the way into extension. Then we have the brachioradialis. It's a long originates at the long supracondylar ridge of the humerus. So you see right here. And it moves down inferiorly towards the stylus process of the radius down here. So it runs all the way the whole length. And its action is elbow flexion as well. It crosses the elbow joint anteriorly and laterally. It's very superficial. If you place your hands on your lap with the thumbs up position and push into the table, you can see it really pop. And that, as it sits right here, we'll go over it in class, but it's right there. It brings the elbow into a neutral position from pronation and supination, or supination and pronation. So because it does that, it does assist with pronation and supination. The triceps brachii has 3 heads, so now we're on the posterior aspect of the humerus. The long head originates at the infraglenoid tubercle. The lateral head originates at the inferior to greater tubercle on the posterior humerus, and the medial aspect originates on the posterior humerus. It inserts at the olecranon process of the ulna for all of it, right? So you see it here. So you see the blues are the origins, origin, and then they all insert right there. Because it crosses posterior, it has a vertical line of pull. So you see that tendon right here, vertical line of pull. This is where you get that bipennate muscles, right? So you see how these fibers are pulling laterally here, but because that tendon goes right here, you're going to get a vertical line of pull with that concurrent force that is created through those muscles. Then we have the pronator teres. It originates at the medial epicondyle of the humerus. It inserts at the lateral aspect of the radius, and it does pronation and assists in flexion. Okay, so it's right here. Okay, and it has a diagonal line of pull, as you see, right? Then pronator quadratus, it originates at the distal quarter of the ulna, right here. And then it inserts at the distal quarter of the radius, and it does pronation. And then we have, sorry, I had the wrong muscle, pronator right there. And then the supinator is up top. So this is the main muscle that does supination. So bringing the hand over, you can feel that in your elbow, in that groove. I'll show you that in class, and you guys will be able to see that in the lab. Anatomical relationships, the elbow joint motions. So the elbow joint in flexion has about 145 degrees of flexion. Extension is typically 0, but if you do have some hyperextension, it's 5 to 10 degrees of that typically. Any motion past that 0 degrees is due to that ligamentous laxity or the olecranon being a little bit smaller, or that groove, that trochlear groove as well. Pronation, the normal range of motion is 70 degrees. Supination is 85 degrees, and that is measured from the neutral position. So when you measure that, you're measuring from here, supination, and then you measure here, pronation. And remember that when we do these motions, the radius rotates around the ulna, and any muscle that pronates or supinates must attach to the radius, because that's the muscle that, or the bone that moves around the other. Then, as we're looking at the body just in general, as we're looking at posture, and we look at the anatomical relationship, or from the anatomical position, we notice that the elbow kind of comes down and then out on most people, right? So you get this little curve here. That curve is either about 5 degrees in men typically, or between 10 and 15 degrees on women. It's at the distal humerus, it's not level, where this starts to happen, and that's why this happens, okay? And the medial side is lower than the lateral, so that's how that that occurs and why that angle occurs. As the hand is to the side of the body, it's outside the shoulders, but when it's flexed, it becomes medial. That's really for eating. It's evolutionary purpose, right? It makes it tough that when we extend our arms, they're out to the side, and then as we bring it up for eating, if it stayed lateral, it'd make it a little bit tough to get that bite in. So you can see here as I take this capsule away, so you see how it's longer here on the medial aspect and shorter on the lateral. That's what causes that carrying angle, because it drives this down and then it comes out. So you get a nice line there as that happens. Okay. And then end feels, we talked about that last in lab. So flexion, the end feel is soft because soft tissue limits that motion. Extension, that's hard, bone stops that motion. Supination here, right? It's firm because muscle and ligament tension stops that. And then pronation, that end feel is hard. Sometimes you even feel that in your elbow when you do that, right? And that's because the radius and the ulna smack against each other as they rotate over each other. So when we look at here, we do have two convex areas and two concave areas. So we have the trochlea and the trochlear groove of the ulna, creating a convex concave rule, right? Then we have the radial head and the capitulum that kind of convex on concave, right? So we have to remember those, that these motions are dictated by the convex concave rule. Okay. Some common pathologies that we get with elbow issues are tennis elbow, which is an overuse of the wrist extensors and the lateral epicondyle. And so you got to watch that annular ligament as well, because that does occur on the outside of that elbow on the lateral aspect where those extensors originate. So you can get some pain there. Golfer's elbow, overuse of the wrist flexors in the medial epicondyle. And elbow dislocation, where a lot of force is when the medial elbow is slightly flexed in a loose, packed position, and it causes that dislocation. And then supracondylar fracture, which is common in children, where you fall on an outstretched hand and fracture it down here. So out here, we're looking at, right out here is where those extensors kind of originate. So you would get your tennis elbow here, okay? You would get right here the flexors. This is golfer's elbow, right on the inside of that elbow. And then lastly down here at the bottom, under all this, you have a growth plate that actually runs right here. That's open until you're about 20 something, and so that's why when you fall on this as a young child, it's very easy to fracture that. And that is all that we have for the elbow, so stay tuned for the wrist, and that will be another riveting episode. Take care.